program here at OHA, and we are recording this meeting. We will be then getting a link for it and posting it on our website. So it will be available for you to watch again if you have any further questions, or maybe you missed something because you were multitasking, which never happens to me. And for folks who were not able to be here. So if you have somebody at your organization who you really wish could have been here to hear all of this great information, that's fine. We're going to have a link on our website. And this is, we have muted everyone to ensure that we can get through the material. If you have a question, please do put it in the chat and we will get to it. And if we can't answer it right now, which sometimes we can't, we will get that answer to you. If you have a question about your specific organization and a very specific, and it's a very specific question, you can go ahead and email that to our grants website, or our grants email, sorry. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Scott Peterson, who's going to lead this TA meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, Jessica. Appreciate it. I see there is one question already in the chat. I think that's a good question to send to us via email, because it's not quite about fiscal, more about media policy. Looks like Rick put the email address right there in the chat for everyone. Great question, though, so we will need to get you an answer on that. But I think this call, we have to do it on the call, so we'll do it via email. So hey everybody, I am Scott Peterson. So I'm actually with Deloitte, supporting OHA as we stand up the M110 program. Mostly focused on fiscal reporting, which is what this call is about today. We will talk a little bit about fiscal reporting overall, but for the most part, we are focused on one of the two particular templates they'll be sending you. And there'll be a future TA session to focus on the other one, although we will touch on it today also, and ask all questions you have. Just in case you didn't see that last slide or read it too carefully, put the questions in the chat and I'll answer them the best that I can here today. But if we run out of time or I don't have the answers, then I think I'll just direct you to the email inbox at that point. We'll get your answers to the right people. So when you send us those emails, we forward those to the right people, so you make sure you get the best answer. This is a bit of our agenda. So we will do an overview of fiscal reporting just broadly, and then we'll focus on what we're calling the budget report template and its purpose and how you would fill that out. We'll do a bit of a live walkthrough. It's an Excel file that'll be emailed to you shortly, I believe actually right after this call. And then we'll talk a little bit about the expenditure report, which is going to be the focus of the next TA meeting. But I think just getting the requirements to you now will be helpful, because you'll need to be tracking that data now in order to fill out the report later. But there will be a whole separate TA later this year on that. That won't be due till spring, so no major pressure on that. And then we'll look at the some of the next steps and next TA meetings in the schedule, and I think give a bit of a teaser on the next TA, which is data. We're calling it data, but in a sense, non-fiscal data or programmatic data reporting that will have to happen as well. We can go to the next slide now, Catherine, if that works. All right, so I mentioned two reports. The focus of today is the budget report, but we'll talk about expenditure report a little bit too. Hopefully answer some questions there or clear some things up, because I know there's already been some questions about the expenditure report. But first, the budget report is just a one-time thing, which is great. And really the purpose of it is that we have the budgets from all the partners that were originally submitted as part of their application. But when they were approved by OAC post negotiations, many of them were just approved as an NTE or at the top level, and we do not have any details about those approved budgets from everyone. We do have it from some, just not all. And we have a way to expedite the reporting or the answering in this template for people who we already have the information for. You don't need to make an update. So it shouldn't be too burdensome for those partners. But for ones that do have to provide an update to us, it should be pretty streamlined as well. But the real purpose is just to snap the line on your budget at this point at the category level. If you recall those budget categories, we'll walk through what that looks like. But in a sense, actually, I'll answer that question right now, even though most questions I'll take later. But if your budget changed through negotiation, then you'll need to provide an update to us. That's how you would know if you need to provide an update or not. If after negotiation, the approved budget was the same as what you applied with, then you wouldn't need to provide us with an application because we have those numbers now. But we would need confirmation from you that nothing changed. Template will be sent out after this call today, and it'll be due on October 14th back to us. We're going to do a live walkthrough and dig into the details of the budget report shortly, but if I can just talk about expenditure report briefly. The expenditure report is the one that I think we all have on our mind. It's reporting your expenses quarterly. I think it's going to be pretty straightforward. We're not asking for extreme detail. We'll be asking for certain categories, budget categories and service areas, and we'll talk about what those requirements are. Although we're not walking through the template itself today, but the template I think is simple. So when we get to that call in the future, we'll provide more clarity on it. We will send that template out after the next TA meeting, the one that is specifically about that report, just like we're doing the budget report today. So submission timeline, if you have questions on this, even after I explain it, please be sure to ask them. I don't want any confusion here, but it's a quarterly report, so it's due quarterly, but it also has a quarter's worth of data included on it. And the reporting due date will be 3 months after the close of the quarter. Another way to think of it is the way we've written it here in the recurring submissions sentence. They are due the last day of the current quarter for the expenses incurred previous quarter. In other words, so for quarter one, January, February, March, you do not have to report that data exactly at the end of March. 3 months later, which would be June 30th, you would actually fill out the report that would include the January, February, March data. So there's a 3-month lag in the report after the close of the quarter, just to give you 3 months to finalize the data and prepare the report and send it back. Hopefully that's enough time. Now, of course, I do realize that means that the very first one is due 12/31 of this year, which is kind of an awkward due date. So I'll tell you up front and be transparent. We'll have some flexibility there, just given it's a busy time for a lot of people. Another nuance here is that the first report that's due 12/31 of this year, although it is for the July, August, September quarter, if you have expenditures prior to that, we want those included as well, because there won't be any other report that would capture the June or earlier data. So, and we want this to be very comprehensive. So the very first report, and we will talk about this again in a following TA session, but this is important, so I'll say it here first. That very first report due, it says January there, but really 12/31, will include basically all of your expenditures up to the end of September of this year. So we're in that quarter right now. I think that covers it. We can go to the next slide, Catherine. So let's get into some details now on the budget report template itself. So this is the one-time report that we're sending out today, due October 14th. We talked a bit about the purpose. The purpose of it is really that we do not have all the details of your approved budget at the category level. So there's 5 budget categories. We know the total NTE that you have that's been approved for you, but we don't have, and in many cases, but not all, we don't have the category totals of your approved budget. So you would really just look at your approved budget and pull the totals from the categories and put those in our report and send them back. Just in a moment, we'll show you what the report looks like, and I'll show you how you fill it out. And we'll definitely take questions on that very specifically in this call today. The purpose really is that we want to show budgets versus actuals over time. So if I want to be able to tell you a year from now that you have 10% of your NTE remaining, but at the category level. So for personnel costs, for example, you have 10% remaining, or maybe a different category, you only have 3% remaining as you burn down on those funds. But we wouldn't know that unless we knew the original starting values in the approved budget for those same categories. So that's why we're trying to lock that in now at the beginning before we actually begin the quarterly reporting. I think it sounds like a boilerplate kind of sentence, but the integrity and completeness of this data is critical, because we could be misreporting later on if this data is not accurate. So just high fidelity there from all of you would be appreciated. I think we can switch screens now, Catherine, and I'll share, if that's okay. Or do I not have the option to share if I'm not the owner of the meeting? I say that because, oh no, I have it. We're okay, everybody. All right, so hopefully you can see my screen here. This is what the template will look like when you first open it. It's going to be emailed to you very simply, just an Excel spreadsheet. When you open it up, it looks like this, totally blank. I want you to focus on the light blue cells Gray cells will auto-populate, or they're just informational. So there's not a lot to focus on. I know this looks kind of busy, but really we're just going to be talking and thinking about these light blue cells. The blue boxes here are the instructions. I would encourage you to follow them closely, and hopefully that can answer questions for you even as you go through it, or if you don't remember something from this call. One thing I'll point out, it's in the instructions, but I'd like to highlight it. When you save it on your computer, if you've made the updates, you're going to send it back to us. I'd like you to use this naming convention here. Of course, personalizing it to yourself and your organization, but use that naming convention there, because we have an automated system that'll pull data from all these reports you're sending us to aggregate them into our data set, but it won't be able to do that if the naming convention isn't what it expects it to be. So, and we can manually go through and change the names, but given the volume that we'll be dealing with, that would be difficult. So first, of course, you put in the burn name that you're part of. You put in your own organization name, and I'm going to give you an example. I think we have an example set up. Perfect. So this is fictitious information, but in the same way that you will do, we put in the burn name, the organization name, using our good example, of course, and you'll make a choice. So here is where if your approved budget is exactly the same as the budget in your application, then you would simply select no here, because no, you do not need to give us any revisions. There's nothing to report because there's no changes between the approved budget and that original application budget. What populates here is from your original application, the budget that you submitted. So it's gray because no inputs are required from you. So once you select no, you would just save this on your own computer, email it back to us, and you're done. Of course, for many people on the call, you will instead choose yes, because many negotiations result in some kind of change, and therefore we would need to know what that change is here. So after you select yes, notice the next light blue box is here, and there's another choice. You can give us either a percentage or a dollar, and what that means, and we'll talk about each one. So percentage, what that means is we know your NTE, but that's all we know. So you could, if you would like, and it just depends how you think of it, how you think of your budget, you could give us the allocations for each of the categories. Let's just say it's 20% for each. You put in 20% here, like this, and it'll calculate the dollars, although you don't have to worry about that. If you think about your budget more about allocation, then just give us that. Notice that this is red, and it just turns red because it doesn't add up to 100, which is what we would need if you were using percentage. If we did add up to 100, then it wouldn't turn red anymore. If that flag is mostly for you, so as you're doing this input, if it's red, just check and see why, because it should add up to 100 if you're using percentage. Now, if we switch it to dollar, it's very similar process. Of course, if you think about your budget in dollars, which I think is probably the more typical way to do this, then you'll give us dollar amounts instead of percentages. I think you can just ignore the percentage column now; it's gray, and you would give us numbers. I mean, I'm just typing in random numbers here to show how it happened. Again, it's red. Now it's red in this case, not about adding up to 100%. Instead, it's red because it doesn't match this original budget, because the NTE should not be changing here because we know your NTE, that's already in our system. So we just don't know the category totals. So as you input the category totals, the master total there should add up to the total budget amount, the NTE that we already know, which in this example is 154,000. So if this was not 154,000, it would be red. Now, if there's a good reason for that you need to talk to us about, a really specific scenario, I would encourage you to fill this out early and email us right away, and we can talk about why this shouldn't add up for you. I think it will for everyone, but I want to allow for some personal situations, and we can have that conversation if we need to. If there's any questions about this, let's put it in the chat. We can always pull this back up later, though, to answer those specifically, because I think it's important to talk about this, and this is really why we're here today. So I believe I have covered everything I wanted to. I think, Catherine, we can switch back to the slides. And we can also jump to the next slide. So if we can pivot for a moment away from the budget report template, we'll talk about the expenditure reporting template. Remember, this is the quarterly one, won't be due until 12/31, wink, wink, January if you need to, at the end of this year. But the information, the data that you'll put into that report needs to be tracked now, or really as soon as your spending happens, you have to start tracking that spending if you want the reports to be accurate, which is very important for us. So you'll see on the expenditure report, there's two tables, two different categories, calling it Section A and Section B. Section A are the budget categories. They're the same as the approved budget in your application, and in the same categories we were just talking about for the budget report. But Section B are the service areas. Now, of course, not everyone will have expenses for all of these services, just depending on what service you're providing. But now I would encourage you to put zeros when you don't have a budget or expenses for a service area. But if you left it blank, I think we. Now, the important thing to note here, just to make sure we all understand, the total of Section A and the total of Section B will actually be the same. So we're asking you to take your total expenses and show them to us by the budget categories, but also in the second table, if you would see in the report, also take your total expenses and show it to us by the service areas allocated between those service areas, just like between the budget categories. But the total data is really the same. So begin tracking now, or as soon as you're spending the money. And even if that was past tense, it might take some analytics or some thought to do that. But this is what the report will look like in general. Really is asking you, what are the totals for the 1 through 5 in Section A, 1 through 7 for Section B. There'll also be a tab for narrative. So if you need to explain something to us, there's a way to do that, to submit a narrative for each of these categories, or for any of the categories that you would need to. In some cases, most cases, it'll probably be pretty straightforward. But if you have a special scenario, you can communicate that to us in the report through the narrative section or the narrative tab, which once you see the report will be very clear. There's not a lot of confusion around the narrative piece. So as it says down at the very bottom, more details will come. We'll have another TA session. I think that'll be in November. That's my goal. It's our timeline in November about this very specifically. And then we'll also send out the report at that time as well. Now, ask any questions you have, though, at this time on this, and we can answer them the best that we can. And otherwise, we'll have to defer them slightly if we don't have an answer yet. Okay, I think that's it for this slide, and we're nearly at the end of the slides, and we'll jump to the questions. So this is a teaser, though, for the next TA session, data reporting, because there could be some questions on this already. I just want to make sure there's a distinction here in our minds between the two. So this is not fiscal. It's other types of data that is required to be reported. The FAQ document is already available, and so I'd encourage you to take a look at that. We're going to send these slides out, and you can use that link there in the first bullet to read through those. The main focus, if you will, is of that next TA session is about the phase data plan, and that'll help us understand what needs to be reported and when. There are 4 phases, so we will focus first on phase 1, though, because that's what will be due first as far as reporting goes. So the next TA session will dig into the details of the phase 1 requirements, what actually needs to be reported. The reporting mechanism, I believe, is going to be a survey. So it's different than what we've talked about today for fiscal, where we will email out an Excel spreadsheet. It'll be a very user-friendly survey, and it's not requesting a ton of information. So don't be intimidated by that. I think it's going to be generally an easy experience. Please email all the questions for it to the inbox. Probably not going to talk about those questions here today, partly because I'm not the right person to answer the questions. We want to make sure the right person does answer them. And also we don't have time today for to focus on the fiscal reporting. We can jump to the next slide, Kevin. Which I think we're nearly at the end. So there we are, way off in the distance. The budget report template review, that's us today. And as we come forward, we'll see data collection next time, certificate of insurance in the future, and also policy and procedures. And I know we've had some questions around that. So hopefully answering those questions now, but not on this call, but through the email. But we will have some TAs on that as well. And then didn't fit on the slide, but after that would come the next fiscal TA session on the expenditure report. I think we can go to the next slide, but I think the next slide is about questions. So I think is the best way for me to do this. I'll just read through the chat here.
Hey, Scott, I can read them for you, and then you can just feel free to answer if that's easiest.
Yeah, sure, that works. I think that'd be a good way to do it.
Okay, so our first question is from Carrie Marsha. How do we know if we need to provide an update?
So I tried to answer that one during the call, but let's do it again quickly. So if your approved budget is different at all than your original budget in your application, then you need to provide us an update, because we only know what was in the application and not the approved one beyond just the general NTE. So the category details are what we do not know, but we need to on the approved budget. So that's how you know if you would need to provide us with an update. And remember, in the template, there's a yes or a no that you would select if you need to provide us an update or not.
Perfect, thank you. And then the next one comes from Tammy Stump, and it says, if we provided an update with our negotiation, does that cover it? And I believe you just mentioned that one as well.
Yeah, so that will not cover it. So if you provide an update, partly because there's a bit of a data integrity issue with what has been provided after negotiations, and we're asking for something pretty specific, very specific in this template. It's just the 5 numbers. And so still responding with those 5 numbers will be very helpful to us, even if you did send it through negotiation.
Next question comes from Emmy Ritter. It's, how are the access to care funds incorporated into this budget?
That is actually a little bit of a tricky question for me. So one, there is, when you certify this, there's a signature tab here on this this report. We are asking for M110 funds only. But there is some questions around that for access to care. So actually, I think I'll ask you to send that one to the email in case there's a different or a better answer comes up in the very near future, and we can respond to it with the final answer, if you don't mind.
Perfect. All right. Next question is from Tabitha Jensen. It says, good morning. Is OHA offering technical assistance support to smaller providers who do not have pre-existing fiscal systems or training on best practices for things like receipt retention or permissible expenses? I am thinking of some of the single providers or mutual aid groups. Also wondering what are the processes is for column shifting expense during the grant period, if you are under overspending in a category. So I think the first question is a great question to send to the inbox, and we can respond back to you. And we're also noting this one down. But the second question, Scott, I'm not sure if you'll be able to answer the process for column shifting expenses during the grant period.
Right. So I would love to give an answer. So the second question about how would you make adjustments between the category? I think when you say column shifting, I'm thinking you mean between categories, right? If your personnel cost is under burning, can use those funds in one of the other categories. I want to tell you that there's a streamlined process to do that, but right now there is not. The grant language is strict, but we are trying right now, yesterday, today, right now we are trying to find a process to do that, and a rule set for how that would work. There'd probably be a form to fill out, et cetera. So we realize that is a need of almost everyone. So it's very much on our minds, but we don't have the good answer right now. I would love for you to send that second question to the inbox as well. So even though we're aware of it, if we can have specific questions to reference from burn partners, that would actually be helpful as we're having these high level conversations. So send it to the inbox. I know that's not a great answer, but we are very aware of it and trying to get the best answer we can.
Thanks, Scott. Next question comes from Janice, and it's, if we submitted a revised detailed budget during negotiation, will that suffice, or do we need to complete this step as well? And I believe the answer is yes, that they still have to complete this even if they submit it during negotiation. Yeah,
answer is yes. If you just pull those 5 category totals out and put them in our report and send them back to us, that'd be extremely helpful. So partly because we're dealing with a very high volume of burn partners, and so this is an automated process. Once you send that back to us, we have automated tools that pull all that into the same location in what we call Smart Sheets, helps us do our analytics reporting later. And also it populates the expenditure reports later with information that will be sent to you. So that automation wouldn't happen if it was something you sent previously. It's only through this template. So if you could follow that process here, that'd be very helpful for us.
Perfect, thank you. All right, next question. It's from Sheila. For those of us that recently submitted the requested revised budget, is this the one that we will be input into the spreadsheet, or the requested and approved funding amount originally placed in our application?
I'm gonna read the question again. That's a good question. So you will take the information out of the requested revised budget. So the first one that you mentioned in your question, recently submitted a requested revised budget. That requested revised budget, those category totals off that budget is what goes into this template.
All right, next question. What is the date range for this budget template? Original submission is 8 months lagging, so there will be a significant variance.
So the budget template is due sooner than that. We don't want to mix these up. There's two templates, a budget one and an expenditure one. The budget template sent to you today will be sent to you today, and it is due October 14th, and it's just capturing that starting budget, your approved budget, so there won't be any lag there in a sense. So I think what you're referring to is the expenditure report. That one due date, I know it's tricky to explain. When you talk about 8 months lagging, if you send it to us early January, it covers from the beginning of your spending until the end of September. Then in March, April, I think it's technically March 31st, the second report will be due, and that will cover October, November, December of this year, right? So there's a 3-month delay, but each one recovers one quarter, except the first one where we just say start from the very beginning, and also that first quarter, because some people didn't, they do have expenses before July 1st. I hope that answers it. Please send, if you have more questions about that, because I know that's a little confusing thing to talk about. We are actually going to build a calendar so that you can see it, because I think visualizing this is going to help. So send us your questions, that same question if you would like, if you have more, to the inbox, we can respond to you. And I think in the next TA session would be a good time to show that calendar, if not sooner.
All right, next question is, we submitted a revised budget. Do we still fill out the form? Yes, please still fill out the form. The next one is from Andy Walsh, and she says, disagree on admin costs being reflected in the service areas. We may need more details on this one, unless Scott, you know exactly where this one's coming from.
So I think the admin cost is one of the budget categories rather than the service areas. It shouldn't be one of the service areas. You're absolutely right. But what I showed you earlier when I shared Excel, and I pulled it up just now for myself, I'm looking at it now. So the fifth one is budget category. The reason we have that is actually a very specific, in the Senate bill, that is a very specific requirement that we have to track admin costs for each burn partner. So we're stuck with that one, but it should be in the budget category section, not in the service area. So if we showed it to you in the service area, that's a mistake. I think it's not one of the services, of course. So good point, but we do need to get that information from you for the budget categories, which will be on both a matter of the budget report, but it's also part of the expenditure report. One's of course the budget, one is the expenses, but admin costs do have to be tracked in that manner.
Thanks, Scott. It looks like Andy put in an update, and she said, however, if both sides were to match, that is why I said that. And Tammy's agreeing, saying they have to equal.
Yes. Yeah, that's true. I don't know if I fully understand the question then. This one might be something that we talk about in more detail, and maybe it's a more personal one. So if you want to send it to our email inbox, then we can think about it and get the best answer and get back to you. I think it's probably the best route for that.
All right, scrolling back up here a little bit. Next question is, who do you submit a budget modification to?
So this is the process that we are attempting to build now. And so I don't have an answer, but working very hard to get an answer on that. Please send that one to the inbox. That one's important to have in our inbox so we can reference it. And we'll definitely give everybody an answer once we have it. I would tell you right now, there's not really a process in place. And so that's why we're working through the details of that.
All right, the next question is, our budget was cut significantly and we will not be able to start operations until January. Should our report just reflect $0 in expenditures for the first quarter? And I think this one's more specific We can look more into that and do it on the shared inbox for sure.
Yeah, you can send that as an inbox. I think others could benefit from that answer too. But zeros is good. If the answer is 0 for any particular period, then 0 is helpful because that'll also flow into our overall tracking system. 0 is better than blanks, and also better than no report showing up at all. So because then we might have questions later if we didn't remember this scenario. So yeah, fill that out with zeros. That'll be helpful. Thank you.
Next question comes from Tammy. I was wondering about capital outlay and administrative costs being allocated per service areas.
So you might be asking, Tammy, you might be asking about methodology, like how would you allocate them to the service areas? That's it's a tricky question. It's technical. I would appreciate if you send that to the inbox so we can think about putting together some language, some advice around that, because you're not the only one who's going to have that question. That's for certain. I think that it's difficult for us to provide one-on-one type of support. I mean, we want to try to do that, but it's difficult with the number of burn partners that we have, and the OHA team is slim. But perhaps we could provide some general or overall advice on allocation. There's various methodologies you could apply. So I can't answer it here, but send it to the inbox and we can think about what method we could use to answer those questions, because you're not the only one with that question, definitely.
Okay. And then the next question comes from Marsha and says, do we contact you directly, Scott, with budget and expenditure questions? Can everyone send it to the M110 grant inbox, and I will personally work with Scott to answer all your questions, but we will filter it all through the M110 grant inbox.
Yeah, definitely go through that inbox. That's just kind of our method to keep this organized, but the question eventually would get to me and my team, and you'll get the best answer we have.
Absolutely. All right, scrolling down a little bit. The next question is, when will contract be issued?
I do not know what that question is referring to. Actually, what maybe you could provide some clarification for me. When will the contract be issued? Yeah, so you can just add to the bottom of this question list if you have maybe a little more details on that.
Sure. All right, so we're going to parking lot that one, and we'll circle back. The next question is, can we use money that was allocated for bus passes to use it for tablets, and how can we do that?
So this question is about how do you move money in a sense? How do you spend money in a different category than it was originally given to you in? So the short answer is no, you can't just simply use those funds for something else. The long answer is we're going to get you a better answer. So please send that to the inbox, because that's the process we're trying to think through right now. For there's lots of different scenarios why, but in almost every case, the burn partner does need to move money between categories. So we recognize that need, but we're working through what the actual mechanism for that would be. Legally speaking, in the grant agreement, there isn't really a mechanism in place. So we're trying to get that approved and find how that would work. So send us that question to the inbox, and we'll let you know when we have an answer.
All right, Scott, looks like we got some clarifying on contract. So contract meaning grant agreement. And Janice added some clarifying there as well, saying contracts are how the OHA pays entities to provide the contracted services. Many entities may not have received their contracts yet.
So I understand now. So yes, so the grant agreements and also the MOU. So it's a bit of a personal timeline. So there's not, it's not really done as just a large batch or anything like that. So there's not a date to give you. I think that, and also that doesn't happen so much with our office, but I do think it's a bit of a waiting game. That's kind of my best answer there. It's a little bit outside my fiscal responsibility. So, I'm not the best person to answer the question. I do think if you're feeling a little nervous about that and wondering why it hasn't happened yet, definitely send that to our inbox. The question that question goes to someone else and not me, but the right person will answer it for you and give you some personalized attention on that.
Alrighty, next question. In regards to expenditures, will backup invoices, timesheets, etc. be required?
No, we are not requiring backup timesheets or say expenditures, so like invoices will not be required, or receipts, and that type of documentation will not be required.
Perfect. Okay. Brian has a clarifying question. So the template has to be sent back regardless if you had a budget update, just marking no on the sheet if you did not, question mark.
That's right. Yeah, everyone should send us this template back, but if you have no update to provide, then select no, because that'll help us populate. Again, so it's an automated process we're trying to use, and so we do need to have some kind of answer, otherwise it just remains an open item. And so it would just simply take way too much time for us to try to go and email everyone individually. So this is the mechanism we're going to use. And hopefully it's an easy thing. You open it up out of the email and you just select your name and then no, and then save and send back.
Next question comes from Katie Olson, and says, not specific to the reports, but more fiscal policy. For the burn services, can the funds only be used for patients that reside in the county associated with the burn? For example, if patients travel from one county to another for services, will they be able to utilize services covered in the burn they receive services in, but do not reside in? Katie, I know this is a great question. I actually just put this question and answer on our FAQ document that will be updated shortly. So please look out for that. We will send out more communication when that FAQ is finalized.
Yeah, nothing to add there, Chelsea. I mean, I actually don't know the answer. That's a very good, deep policy question.
I do know we have an answer for it, but I do not want to misspeak. So it'll be coming on the FAQ.
Sure.
Next question, will a recording of the session be available to review? Absolutely. Once we are done recording, we will post this to the M110 website for everyone to review after this session. Next question from Sue. Can you confirm if this is for all county OHA Measure 110 for Multnomah, Washington, and Clackamas Falls County?
If I understand the question correctly, the answer is that no county would be excluded from this reporting. I hope that answers it. If that doesn't, maybe clarify the question down below, or add another comment. But certainly those counties are included as well. Yeah.
Hey, there's a question here from Lisa that says, what, if any, are the criteria for significant changes that would require an amendment to the budget?
So for a budget, like a grant amendment, which I think is really what that means, there is a form to send out. I think that process is a little bit, it's not terribly well defined, but we have people who know, who are not me. So send that to the inbox, but there's a form you would send out to go back to OAC for approval. It's a bit of a process, but there is mechanisms in place for that. But if you send it back to the inbox, we'll get the question to the right people and give you the formal and correct answer.
Okay, there is another question from Brian that says, Scott, you mentioned that partners with expenses prior to the 7/1 date should include them on the first report. Previously, OHA has said that costs only go back to 7/1. What are the circumstances where going farther back is allowed?
So I'm not familiar with the first advice you received, but I know that if you spent M110 funds, so if you were spending funds prior to actually receiving the funds, I do not think that would count. So that might be what you're referring to. But if you did receive M110 funds and started spending them and happening prior to 7/1, then you would report them and they would count. I don't think there's an exception to that, because we're not that concerned about the date. If you received M110 funds, you started spending them, then we simply want them reported. If you're asking about funds that were spent for these services, but before you were awarded M110 funds, that's a tricky question. If that's the case, that's what you're referring to, then send that one to the inbox. We can send it to the right person to answer. But that's definitely a policy question.
We have a question here that goes back to the documentation for expenditures. So Brian asks, when you say backup documentation will not be required for expenditure reports, do you have guidance regarding if it will be required for a later audit?
I would like to get the most formal answer from OHA leadership. I think you should send that to the inbox, but I'll tell you that I really don't think that these are going to be required and there won't be a later audit. And, you know, the advice we have is that invoices will not be required really at any point. So I don't think you have to have that concern, but let's get the best answer and an absolute final answer on that. So send it to the inbox and we can get it to leadership for review.
All right, and we have hit the bottom of our list. So the last question is, we have been waiting to deliver services and hire staff. Can we start services prior to the grant agreement being signed, and will associated costs be allowable?
Similar to a few questions ago, that is very tough. I think there's a good chance it's not. So let's send that question to the inbox so we can have people of greater authority answer on policy questions like that, and when there's a personal and kind of tricky situation happening. So send it to the inbox. We'll try to get an answer quickly on that one because it sounds like timeline could be a factor. But I don't think I should try to answer here. I think we should get you the best answer possible. So I don't want you to start incurring costs and then it turns out I was wrong and maybe they don't count or something like that. So shoot it to the inbox. I think that's the way to do it.
Perfect. All right, we got another question from Marcia. So with regards to expenditures back on 7/1, are you saying we only be accounting and tracking expenditures once funds are received? Or is it that contracts are for an 18-month period beginning with 7/1 and we can report expenditures from 7/1 even if we receive executed contract in August?
So if you received your contract and then your funds, because it's also about when you receive the funds. So if you receive the funds in August and start spending that money, you would report from that point going forward. Now we've had a couple questions now about what if you spent money for these services before you actually receive the funds. I'll think of it as like your own money that were simply not M110 grant funds yet. That's where we start to get into some I would say policy gray area to me. So let's send that to the inbox. It'll be we can answer several of these all at once, and we'll have legal authorities weigh in who can give you the right answer, just to make sure. I don't think that's a very common scenario, but it is happening. So let's get the right answer. I can see a theme here in the questions too. We want to make sure everyone has the right answer on that.
And Scott, Ben put in some clarifying there too. So if effective date of the grant is 7/1, however, and funds are being used to cover expenses incurred back to that date, reporting should include that period.
Yep. Very good. Thanks, Ben. I didn't know Ben was on the line. That's very helpful. Yeah, thanks, Ben. That's perfect.
All right, I think I covered all questions. If I scrolled past one and we did not cover it, please feel free to copy and paste it back into the chat so we can answer, or send it to our mailbox and we will get you an answer there as well.
So we don't want to, I want to give a moment for any further questions. We also don't want to take up excess time from people. I know you're all busy like we are. So going once, more questions, going twice. Okay. Well, I appreciate everyone's time today. I hope this was helpful. I think there probably will be more questions, so send them to the inbox and we will get on them right away. Keep in mind, there will be another TA session still about fiscal reporting, focusing on the other template, but we can talk about whatever we need to and answer whatever questions come up at that time as well. That won't be for a few months now though. But looking forward to speaking to you all again at that point or via email in the meantime. All right, thanks everybody. Appreciate your time. Have a good one.